All right. Well, it's Healthcare Unfiltered, and I couldn't be happier because I feel that I've actually known my guests for a long time simply by reading her amazing book. Kathy Giusti, thank you so much for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so happy to be here.
And I know how busy you are. We'll talk about this. So really, making time for me and my listeners will not go unnoticed. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy to do
Um,
it.
And Kathy, the reason I reached out to you is about your book because your book really has this amazing combination of your personal story, but really you really wanted to take this as an example to help other people that could be in your shoes anytime. So we'll go over this, but I want to start by if somebody asks you who Kathy Giusti is, what would you say? Like, who are you?
Well, I would say my description would be probably in this order: mom, wife, and healthcare disruptor. Um, and I think the reason I say that is because, you could sense while I was writing the book that there's two elements of when you get diagnosed with cancer. One is your ability to save your life and how much time and energy that takes. And the other is the ability to live your life. And the living your life is really, you learn quickly, it's really your family and your closest friends. So the role of wife and mom and sister and all of those things are what drove me, motivated me. It's where I wanted to put my time. And yet, you can tell by reading the book that what took so much of my time and what decades later I felt badly about was what took so much of my time was the battle against cancer and the battle to save my life because it takes a toll on every patient. And it certainly took a toll on me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do that so well in the book that we are going to talk about. I have to say, Kathy, um, um, you know, one of my least favorite questions that sometimes patients with cancer get asked, well, how did you feel when you got your diagnosis? Well, God damn it, I did not feel pretty good. I mean, like how are you going to feel? But the reason I
Yeah.
bring that up is because in your situation, your initial diagnosis was before the era of internet, all of that stuff. And you called your primary care doctor and you really wanted to get to know on the phone what's going on and things like that. Two questions here. Number one is tell me about the communication between a physician and a patient when it comes to tough diagnoses. And do you
Hmm.
feel that like sometimes it's very difficult to do on the phone? Like I was reading that exchange in all transparency between you and your primary care doctor. And one of the things that struck me, you said, I'm not going to get off the phone unless I know blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And part of me, I felt very bad for you because of course you want to know, you're the patient. I also felt bad for him because he like, maybe
Mhm.
he wants to say it like face to face. He doesn't want to say it on the phone. Help me understand that dynamic.
Yeah, that dynamic's important. And I'm going to come back to that story. But the reason this dynamic is very important of the doctor sharing a cancer diagnosis with a patient today is because in today's world, we get our results back often before a doctor can ever reach us. So, there's laws now that say that as soon as the results are back, a Dana-Farber or a Sloan Kettering download them into your patient portal, and now you're seeing those results, and you can't even reach your doctor because they're in the clinic. So, in today's world, this is a really important issue. Like, how do we make sure patients are going to get the right information at the right time and not be overwhelmed? In the situation you're talking about of when I was diagnosed, which was way back in 1996, before there was an internet, the beauty of that discussion was I was having it with my primary care doctor, who was also an internist. And this is something else I highly recommend in the book, is many people forget the importance of having a primary care doctor slash internist that is doing annual physicals and taking really good care of you, reminding you of all the scans and screenings that you need to do to take care of yourself. So in this situation, I was going to the primary care doctor because we were trying to have a second child. I was older and I needed to get referred on to a fertility doctor. And he was the gatekeeper. I needed his sign off to get my insurance approval to get on to the fertility doctors. And so he had done the blood tests on me and had seen, something unusual, which was really the elevated protein. My hemoglobin was super, super low. And it was just giving him a clue. Now, remember in the book, I also say he had just had, within the past year or two, another patient that was female in my age. Otherwise, I'm not sure way back when that he would have been so aware of these signs, early signs of multiple myeloma, and reminding me to go back and get the next round of testing, which was immunoelectrophoresis and bone marrow biopsy. But because he had seen another person my age, because myeloma, as you know, skews toward the 60s and it skews older male and African American. I was not your typical myeloma patient, although my grandfather had had it. And so I think he was more aware. His approach with me was incredibly thoughtful. He knew I was driving. I had said I was driving, and he was just trying to give me the opportunity to just see him the next morning in his office. And I just kept pushing him for more information until he told me what I thought I had. And I thought he handled it pretty well. He also opened his office for me on Saturday morning, late morning, to come in and see him. That's how thoughtful he was. And then gave me the full diagnosis. But by then I had already made it to Borders bookstore and kind of studied the disease a little bit myself. So I had a lot of questions. But as you know, one of the things about this is that you don't get the full diagnosis until all the testing has been done. So you're still always hoping when you are seeing the primary care, it's like, we believe this is what you have. We suspect this. And you're still always hoping and praying that it's something else until the confirmatory testing is done. And then you have somebody looking you in the eye and going, no, you have this. And it's
Yeah.
tough.
And I think there's this wait period sometimes that, like you said, occasionally you may not get the diagnosis day one, and it could take a week to 2 weeks. And you articulate very nicely. You explain to people, you know what, it's okay. There are a few things you could do as you are waiting for this.
Yeah. I think the important thing for people to understand is that you can, while you're waiting, get high quality information. What I was trying to explain to them is I don't want you to go down the rabbit holes. So we're very fortunate in the US in that we have very good websites for people to go to. It's just there's so many, they don't know where to start. So I always remind them that my favorite was cancer.net, which is the website from the American Society of Clinical Oncology. That has now been combined with cancer.org from the American Cancer Society. And then you also have cancer.gov, which is the National Cancer Institute or NIH. All three of those sites are an amazing place to start, and they will give you high quality information to then move you to hopefully a patient foundation or another group strictly focused on your specific type of cancer. And that's when you have to learn how to use these nonprofit foundations very wisely and know which questions to ask them, because they have a plethora of information with regard to the best doctors, the best studies, the best treatments.
Absolutely. And what you are highlighting, Kathy, is that the era of information, there's so much information out there, but sometimes it's not actually easy to access despite how available it is. Signal from noise. I'm going to quote something you wrote on page 8 of the book. And for folks who are listening, it's Fatal to Fearless, one of my favorite books this year. But you wrote on page 8, and I quote, "The age of information should be empowering. It should help us stay rational, calm, and fact-based. But what I encountered only made my head spin, ultimately disempowering me." Tell me about this, because you bring two contrasts. Like, okay, it's wonderful we have all of this, but what I went through made me dizzy.
Yeah, there's even now, I mean, myeloma has made such tremendous progress, right? So I went from where is the information on this? There's no abstracts, there's
Yeah.
nothing going on in the field of myeloma to today, it's one of the most successful progressive cancers out there. But the issue is, it's not like the data is always giving you a definitive answer. Back then, some people would say move towards stem cell transplant. Other people and other things I was reading were saying, no, you could be in an early stage, stay in that early stage as long as you possibly can. Just watch and wait. Those are two very different things. And so you're overwhelmed. Even in myeloma today, patients are now with all of the immunotherapies, they'll call me. I still coach many a myeloma patients, you can imagine, but they call me and they're thinking, I was just diagnosed. Should I be doing a stem cell transplant anymore? Or am I moving to a CAR T or a bispecific? And there's an orderly process by which you move from one round of treatment to the next round of treatment to the next, but it's really very precision based. It's decided based off of your genomics, your subtype, your staging. And I think all of that makes it incredibly overwhelming for the patient. We talk a lot about shared decision making. The patient has to make these decisions with the doctor, and they do, but patients are still overwhelmed by the science. It's confusing. And so I don't
Yeah.
blame them to
Yeah.
be overburdened by the whole thing.
And Kathy, when you were diagnosed, you were a very, uh, you know, very successful pharmaceutical executive. You worked at Searle at the time, and you certainly were just on the upswing of the on the
Yeah.
executive ladder. And you know, obviously, people in that on that level, they usually have the sense of control over their career and life. I mean, you just honestly can't be a COO or a CEO unless you have that. However, when you get diagnosed, you almost feel yourself stripped from that control.
Yeah.
And it becomes very challenging. And I know in the book you do everything possible to let patients maintain that control of their lives, but it's just very
Mhm.
hard. So how did you feel when you just lost that control? It's almost your fate now is in the hands of so many other people. Many of them are strangers you've never met.
Yeah, I think when you're 37 years old and you get diagnosed with a cancer that is 100% fatal. And, everybody is saying to you at best, you're going to live 3 years. Your life changes completely, right? Like the thing about myeloma back then was there were no ifs, ands, or buts. I was going to die. That was it. Like, so my life was more about, okay, what am I going to do? Can I make it 3 years? Could I possibly beat 3 years? Our daughter Nicole at the time was 18 months. I kept thinking, if I just beat 3 years, will she remember me? Like, will she at least know she had a mom? And so then you really take the time. All I was thinking about was, how do I max these 3 years? And is there anything I could do to get four? That was basically it. So my life was very much putting into play what my husband and I really wanted. And when you read the book, you realize that all I really wanted was to continue my life as I had started, which was we were going to see a fertility doctor. We wanted to have another child. And so everything I was doing was to control that process. I was like, okay, I can't control the cancer. I can control the steps I take forward. And that is, I'm going to say it out loud. I'd like to have another child. The docs may think I'm nuts and crazy, but I talked about it with my husband. We talked about it with counselors, and I just felt like maybe this was the right thing for me. And so all of my controlling went to that goal. And once our son David was born, and I'm like, oh my gosh, now I have two little ones, and we had to get near family. All of my control went to how do we get near family? And that was like my 3 years. Now I'm out and I'm almost 3 years, and I'm going, where am I going next? But then a little bit of serendipity in medicine, we know it happens. Thalidomide is emerging, and thalidomide is teaching us that there's new ways to treat multiple myeloma. And me with a pharmaceutical background who believes in new therapies and new drugs, I was so excited about this. And so that really jump-started all of my work at the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, which again, all of my control went there. So you kind of like shift your focus from, and I write about this a lot in the book, what is your goal now? Like you have to think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
And then your controlling personality has to move in the direction of that goal, knowing that you can't control the cancer. You
Yeah.
can't. And you don't know your good days from your bad days. I think this is one of the hardest parts. Like, you know, you're feeling well, so you're trying to get as much work done and everything done on those feel good days, because you know you're going to have a couple days where you don't feel well.
You know, you strike a very, very beautiful balance between the human element in the book, where I got to know you as a person, and the scientific piece, and I got to know you as the CEO of the MMRF, which we want to talk about. But I'm glad you mentioned the pregnancy with David.
Mhm.
Um, I really like, I was feeling for you when you made that decision as I was reading this. This is not easy. I mean, you were being told that you have 3, 4 years at most, and yet you were making a decision to be uh, pregnant. So, I mean, essentially, you could. It wasn't easy. What pushed you? Like, what solved this issue? Was it Paul, your husband? Like, how did you? Like, I could imagine it's really not an easy decision to say I'm going to get
No.
pregnant, yet I may not be around.
Yeah, I think there were a few things going on. Um, One was, um, when I was writing in my journal. So I think the reason that you appreciate the book is this balance between the personal and the business slash science side, is because I had to go back and read all the journals I'd written since the day I was diagnosed. So then I was 37, now I'm 66. That's almost 30 years of journals that I've written for our children and for Paul as well. And so when you go back and read 30 years of your life, you're like, whoa, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What didn't I do at all? And so I think, for in terms of the pregnancy side, Paul and I had decided we wanted, 2 or 3 children. And now I felt like I was just letting him down. I just felt like I was leaving and I had not achieved what we wanted to do. And I also had this sense of, I want to live like I'm going to live. I know it sounds crazy, but I want to do the best I can. And the final thing is, there's nothing wrong with being an only child. So I don't want anybody to hear it that way. But my father was an only child, and he was not an easy guy. And I grew up with a twin sister, identical twin. And so I always had a sidekick. So I really wanted Nicole to have a brother or sister to help her through. And I was determined. And so, I talked about it with Paul. He was more concerned than I was because he wanted me to get treatment as soon as I needed it, and he was worried. But the doctors worked really well with us to decide, when and how to take it on. And I was very lucky that there was an IVF hospital near, it was on my ride to work that I could
Yeah.
get to every day. Otherwise, I don't know how I would have done it
Well, I'm
all.
I'm a big fan of David now because I've never met him, but there was a picture of you, David and Nicole, on the Stat magazine, Stat
Yeah.
website that Matt Herper wrote, and what was David wearing? Tom Brady's jersey. And I'm a Patriots fan, and that's it. You could tell David he's one of my favorites now because he's wearing Tom. I think he was probably a few years old. He was pretty young because you had
He
the
was.
you were getting
Yeah.
transplant at the time.
Well, and how
Uh,
strange that I ended up working for Robert Kraft,
yeah.
the Patriots up at Harvard Business School when
Yeah.
he was,
I mean,
we were all
absolutely
fans, I guess.
absolutely my
Yeah,
favorites. So you have, I mean, I have to say that this is the book that has the most WTFs I've ever read.
I know.
So congratulations, you win the award of the most
Thank you.
WTFs. But the nice thing about this WTF, it's unfiltered, by the way. You could say whatever you want, don't worry.
Oh, good.
But you told people, hey, transform WTFs to WTDs. I love that. But one of the steps that you mentioned, I mean, basically the book talks about steps to help patients navigate the journey of cancer. And your step 3 is identify what I need and what I want. Can you
Mhm.
just talk about this a little bit? Because it's a very vague thing. What do I need? What do I
Yeah,
want? How do you
yeah.
help people with that?
Yeah, so that's really important. So the what I need is when you get this diagnosis and your mind starts racing, it's usually going to race to your immediate needs, like I can't live without this, which is going to be how am I going to get to work? Who is going to help take care of my children? Who's cooking? Who's taking care of the dog? It can be a million different things. What about my insurance? How do I get this covered? All of those things. Those are your immediate needs, and that's what's going to come to the surface right away. What's different is the what do I want? The what I want is literally me sitting, writing in my journal. I really wish that I had gotten Nicole a sibling. I really wish she had a brother or sister. And when you start writing, and again, not everybody's going to write in a journal, but when you start, your mind moves and you start thinking about things, that's the stuff that matters to you. It can be, I've seen this having coached so many patients. It can be for men. They still want that promotion. A woman may say, I still want that promotion. I'm going to stay at work. I just don't want to have anything take me away from the goals I had there. And I love the distraction of work. Other people will say, no, I want to be remembered a certain way. Others may say I have to write a book. I have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
I have to travel the world. So it doesn't matter what you want, just write it down. And I think at the end of the day, you have to make sure you stay true to what you really want. Because I find that what happens is life gets busy and you forget what's
Yeah.
important. Because technically my real want was to grow our family and create memories. And I think the sense you get from reading the book is that I did it as best I could, but I took a lot of time away on saving my life that didn't allow me to give as much time to the living my life. So I think that's where I always say to people, put that want somewhere that you're really seeing it and let it remind you every day of what matters most.
Was founding the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation one of your wants, or did that
No,
emerge? Yeah, tell me about that. Like
no.
what was the spark that said, you know what, I'm gonna form a foundation?
Funding research was absolutely a want because remember, my goal was I want to live the 3 years, I'd love to live 4 or 5 to see Nicole to kindergarten. And I knew the only way to do that was to jumpstart research. There was nothing going on in myeloma. There were no doctors working in the field. And the reason for that was because there's no money in the field. A scientist with a PhD can't, leave university and decide they're going to go into a field if there's no money in it. You have to be able to get grants. So, of course, I knew all that having worked in the healthcare industry. So, I decided I would start raising money. I was very fortunate that Searle, where I was working, decided to do a fundraiser for United Way, but to also do it focused on myeloma research. And so this money started flowing in, and my sister, who's an attorney, created a community fund. And that allowed us to start raising money right away. And then we just had these phenomenal, thoughtful, generous networks that were donating to us. And next thing I knew, we were funding grants, quite a bit. And then we hosted our very first major fundraiser, raised nearly $500,000. And this is way back when. That was a lot of money. And so we were no longer a community fund. They told us we had to move out and be a 501(c)(3). So when I laughed about that and said, did you want to start it? I was like, no, I was very happy being a community fund, but they were basically saying, no, you and your sister have the potential to do something amazing here. So we're the mama bird. I remember them saying this, the mama bird's kicking the baby bird out of the nest, and you've got to go. And, they just encouraged us. And so I did. But I did it hesitantly because I knew it was going to take on a life of its own. And I had two little ones. And then I also was wondering, like, when I die, who's going to run it? Like, I'm going to have transitions here. But remember,
Yeah.
at that point, I was still believing I was going to die, and I had every right to believe that.
So you're the Chief Executive Officer of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation.
Yeah.
Um, you know, where obviously, you've done, I mean, the foundation has done amazing work bringing new drugs to market. But where do you see that going? Like the vision of the foundation remains the same, just bring new drugs to market?
Yeah, the vision of the MMRF has always been incredibly single-minded, which was, back then it was to find new treatments to accelerate a cure. And so that's what we did. I mean, myeloma has seen over 15 drugs approved, which is incredible. And I think we were able to do that because we would always meet with the scientific community, with FDA, with NCI. Like we were great at hosting those types of meetings. And together, because you need everybody in the healthcare system to chime in, because everybody has to play a part. And nobody's ever going to win. You have to come up with ideas where everybody gets something out of it, but nobody's a clear winner. So in our situation, starting off, nobody understood the biology of myeloma. So I figured that out. And I was like, well, if you can't get tissue samples, you'll never figure out the biology. I mean, just having everybody in the room with me, that was clear. I knew that from how precious my own fresh bone marrows were and how they were moving from an igloo cooler up to the lab at Dana-Farber. So you bring everybody together and you say, okay, well, we'll get a tissue bank. Let's start doing that. And then once you get the tissue bank done, now all of a sudden genomic sequencing is starting to take off. So now we do that with the Broad. So you kept moving from what is the problem that the myeloma community is facing together, and then how are we putting it together as kind of a trusted third party model. And it's also how we put together a clinical network,
But
which
I
is
guess
still
where do
in
you
works
see,
today.
yeah, like where do you see, like I think we had the era, you had the new drugs, the genomic sequencing. If you had to pontificate and put kind of a futuristic hat, where do you see the next big potential breakthrough for myeloma? That's one
It's
question.
clearly, yeah, yeah,
And the second question is,
yeah.
have you been able to engage a lot of patients? I mean, you're a patient, but aside from you, in decision making in terms of the trajectory where the MMRF is going, I'm not talking enrollment or support, but is there a patient's voice aside from you in the direction where the MMRF is going?
Yeah, so first is where is it going? In today's world, I think, and we talk about this a lot, I'm on the board of the MMR, so I'm not doing the day to day, but I'm on the board. The focus of the organization is in this world where the decisions are unclear, how can the MMRF play a role to make the decisions clear? So examples would be we're looking at bispecifics, we're looking at CAR T therapies, we're looking at a whole multitude of immunotherapies. We're trying to understand in today's world how they should be combined and how they should be put together. And we're looking for more innovative clinical trial design. I don't know if you listened yesterday, but Laura Esserman did a beautiful job talking about her I Spy trial in breast cancer and just doing these adaptive trial designs. So where the MMRF is now is taking a look at the same type of trial designs for multiple myeloma so that we can quickly decide which immunotherapy, which combination of immunotherapies, working with the academic and the industry community, how do we start combining these drugs in a way that is the best for the patient based off of their individual diagnosis, whether it's genomic or their immunophenotyping. So all of that comes into play. And that really is another example would be, I think one of the hardest challenges for myeloma patients today is when to start treatment. For me as a smoldering patient, I was waiting and waiting and waiting, thinking, God, should I start? Should I start? And then fortunately for me, my myeloma kind of exploded and I saw it on a PET scan and I could see it from my M-spike, but it's not always that way. So when do you start? And the other big question for myeloma patients is when do you stop maintenance therapy? Like if you are in a complete response for X period of time, we don't want to be on these drugs. They're toxic. So can we go off? So those are the decision areas where the MMRF wants to play a role as a data-driven company and as a group that brings people together. I think it's time to help patients do the consensus. And when I say that, I also mean for all patients. I think the MMRF is really getting involved in making sure every patient is represented. Myeloma, like we said, skews African American. We have to make sure all the trials are representative of the patient group, and they do that quite well in their clinical network. And then I think the other piece it's that they are focused on, which is really helpful, is the patient navigation group. So they have full-time navigators at the MMRF, which are hugely helpful because when you get stuck, there's always somebody you can call to get you to the right center, and they'll stay with you through the entire journey, which I think is
Wow.
phenomenal. And that
Mhm.
is how we get the patient perspective in and out of the MMR. If they're calling all the time to the patient navigation group, and that navigation group is integrated into the day-to-day of the MMRF.
So you have like a hotline if there's a patient, they
Yeah.
can call in the MMRF.
Oh yeah, anytime. And
Yeah.
what blows me away is that people forget we have it.
Yeah.
So like I think this is another area like when we were talking about, you're on the physician side, I'm on the patient side. And I think I am hugely empathetic to the physician side because I see how crazy the clinics are and there's such limited time to work with the cancer patients. At the same time, I wish there was a better way to help patients to know there are resources available to you. And I don't, whether it's done through the patient portal automatically, like here's where you could go now that you've been diagnosed, here's the number you should call. That also comes into play, like at the big academic centers. People like when you're working in healthcare, docs, PhDs, everybody, they need funding and they need patients. So there's
Well,
always a little bit
the,
of friction.
yeah, you were empathetic to the physician's thing, but there was a WTF moment. You called Ken Anderson, and like, hey, WTF, you're using my information and publishing a paper and not telling me about it. Tell us about this because I was thinking WTF too. I'm like, he should have told you about this. And I know
I
Ken, but he should
know.
have told you this is going to write a paper about you.
Every time you see a WTF in my book, it means, are you effing kidding me? Like that,
Exactly.
this is how our healthcare system is. Or if I were in a meeting, you would be like hearing me say, if patients knew this, they would be so upset right now. So every WTF means the system's broken. You've got to be kidding me. Like this is what we're doing. So in that situation, yes, I had done tons of research with my identical twin up at Dana-Farber. And thank God Ken Anderson was interested in doing that again. That's a translational doctor who's loving the information coming in from the PhD side and moving it out to the clinical side through the MDs and back and forth. And so they had all this great information on both my sister and me, and they had done enough on the genomic side to know that I had a translocation of 414, which at the time put me at a very, very high risk in myeloma. So now you've got a fatal disease and you've got one of the worst ones out there. So as soon as you finish smoldering, you're going to blow up like a volcano. That's all that was going through my mind is the visual. And so Ken did all the testing. They submitted an abstract, and the abstract was approved.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how the medical world works. Like when you're in academia, you need to publish. You
Yeah.
want to publish on everything you can publish. I don't blame them. Like I get it. I don't think the reward system is the best, but I do understand it. And so all of a sudden I was in the publication machine and that was fine. I wouldn't have even minded. It's just along the way, he wasn't sure that abstract was going to get approved. You never know, right? So all of a sudden, I'm seeing the approved abstract at the same time he is. And now I'm reading it, and it's very clear to see me. It says identical twin, da 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 age. It's not like it's that hidden in there. And now I'm reading it for the first time and thinking, oh God. And so, yeah, I called him, and I was not a happy camper, but it was true. I was very lucky to be an identical twin in every which way with multiple myeloma. Any cancer patient who has an identical twin, you're unique and it's helpful. And I really did want to make sure our research was helpful to other people.
Well, I mean, you're an amazing writer. I mean, I could totally tell when you're mad, when you're upset. I could totally tell, and it takes a lot for a writer to be able to do this because I was literally as if I was watching a documentary about you. But two things that were really important, going back to the human side, and I appreciate the fact you spent a lot of time on this. You talked
Mhm.
about hair loss. And
Mhm.
you talked about the first time you were receiving chemotherapy that's going to lead to hair loss. As someone who's taking care of a lot of patients, I used to spend a lot of time actually counseling patients, women and men, if they're going to lose their hair, because it is not trivial. And sometimes I feel the medical community kind of downplay, well, you're just going to lose your hair. And then they leave the room. I'm thinking, well, what do you mean you're going to lose your hair? That's a big issue for most patients and most families. But you spent a lot of time on this. And in my mind, I'm thinking what Kathy is trying to tell the physicians and the nurses, this is a big deal. This is a big
Mhm.
deal. I'm not vain to be
Mhm.
concerned about my hair loss. Did I understand your point of doing this properly?
Yeah, I think, and again, because maybe it's because my father was a clinician, a physician, and my mom was a nurse. I tend to be supportive anyway because I do know how hard the medical community works. I think my complaint and who I'm really trying to talk with are the the people in the system, where I feel like it doesn't have to be the job of the clinician, of the doctor who's literally has 15 minutes to walk you through the treatments. It doesn't have to be his job to understand all the issues you're going to face with the side effects, but somebody has to have the job of sharing that with you. And it could be the nurse, it could be a navigator. I'm a huge fan of navigators. They're not getting reimbursed. I wish that the oncology groups could have really strong navigators to help the patients. I think it would ease the burden for the docs and the nurses if we had more of them. So my message was really to understand, and another example I would give in this situation was, as a young patient at the time, I needed to understand, like, what could they help me in terms of having young children? Where was I going to go for psychosocial support? How was I dealing with all of that? But if you're an older patient, like I deal with a lot of older patients now, you do a stem cell transplant, you go through menopause, but nobody tells you, like, who's walking you through that? So I feel like there's a whole plethora of things that hit you that are not sitting in the treatment side and that the medical oncologists are not trained to do. And I don't know if that's necessarily their job. I mean, how much are we supposed to put on one person? But I think it needs to be somebody's job.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The other thing that I was thinking about when and you spend some time on it is telling people, specifically the kids. And I think that's really an issue. What's your advice to patients and families in terms of telling the kids, not telling the kids, when to tell the kids? You wrote nicely about this in the book, but maybe in your own words.
Yeah, I think they start giving you hints of when they're ready to hear it. My philosophy is don't don't say anything until you need to, and they'll start giving you the signs that they want to know about it. If you are running to the doctor's offices, because now you're in treatment, right? And you're busy trying to get there, they're going to see that. They're going to know something is changing in their lives where mom's always going, dad's always driving, whatever it may look like. And so at that point, if you believe that life is changing and they need to know something, tell them, but don't tell them more than they need to know. Once you start to give them information, they'll start asking their own questions. So you've got to stay quiet. You kind of give them, like, for us, we knew our kids were ready. Also, we faced a slightly different issue in that now I was in the press a fair amount, and I just really didn't want our kids to see something in a lying around in a magazine or have a friend at school say something to them. But we also had to pick the right time to say it, like when things were peaceful in the house, and just prepare ourselves. And you could tell from that conversation that it was not a long conversation, but our daughter, who was in sixth grade, had a million more follow-up questions than our son, who was in third grade. It really all registered with her. She was understanding what was going on. In third grade, he was still not capturing it. When I was later diagnosed with breast cancer, they're both adults. And he was really picking up on it this time and going, because now he was old enough to really understand the whole world of cancer. And she was, of course, our daughter was kind of hit with it as a double whammy again. But yeah, don't tell them anything more than they need to know. And they'll ask the questions they have. Just keep it really open so that they're happy to come to you with those questions.
And I think timing is actually key with this. You mentioned breast cancer, Kathy, and I was a bit surprised by your decision on double mastectomy, because, as you could imagine, you're a very successful, educated, high figure in the medical world. So there will be women who will read your book. Some of
Yeah.
them may have breast cancer, and I think we both agree that not every woman would have had double mastectomy. So how do you make the contrast between a woman who's reading this book right now, for example, and maybe had a lumpectomy, and now she has, like, she's maybe doubting herself because you're her
Yeah.
idol, you're her, like, role model.
Yeah, I went through this. It was a really, really tough decision for me. And that's why I say there's every decision is personal. And so you can't kick yourself. Every patient is making the right decision for them with the information they have at that time. My situation was incredibly unique in that our family had been through this cancer journey since I was 37. I mean, it was a long journey, and it goes like this. I mean, even though you feel like you're okay, I still go to Dana-Farber every 2 months. You still wait for test results. Things pop up, and then you're worried, and they come back down. And there's just a lot that goes on with this journey. Um, and so when the breast cancer diagnosis came, I was in a very unique situation in that if I did the surgery, if I did a double mastectomy, I would require no treatment at all, no chemo, no radiation, no nothing. I also knew I was at high risk. I have an identical twin sister who was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and I'd had radiation to my ribs from my myeloma. So all of those things were kind of putting me at a high risk. So I knew I didn't know, but I was certainly at high risk of getting breast cancer. And so the fact that we caught it early made me say, okay, I could actually get off this cancer roller coaster ride that I keep putting my family through, and just be done. Now, having said that, um, again, I went through the surgery and I made my own mistakes, which is what I think is really important about in the book, is that what I really am trying to say to everybody is I had everything going for me, the right education, the right insurance, the right family, and I still screwed it up. So here I am doing the surgery, and what I found out later was that the risk of surgery of infection goes higher based off of your age, knowing that you're going to do reconstruction. So, you're putting the expanders in right away. And your immune system, and of course, your immune system with myeloma, which my immune system stinks. So I ended up in a challenging situation of infection that went on and on and on. And so I couldn't get off the roller coaster ride. And so again, that's why there's no right or wrong decision, because I agree with you. I took a very highly, perhaps overly aggressive stance, but I did it because we'd been on this roller coaster too long and I just wanted to get off.
Yeah, you remind
And
me totally on. It's very, you remind me actually of a patient I mentioned in my own book, The Cancer Journey. This is a patient who definitely needed chemotherapy by medical indication,
yeah,
right? And I was having this, I was really unhappy when he declined. And then he smiled and looked at me and he said, I know it's the right decision for pretty much almost all patients in my situation, but it's not the right decision for me.
I mean,
And I tell you, I learned so much. I mean, I think every physician should learn from their patients. I mean,
yeah.
that's my opinion.
Yeah. And the other thing you do remember is what you don't see is like my identical twin sister, who was diagnosed stage 3, is on the aromatase inhibitors, can't get off. Again, they don't know when do you get off them, when do you stay on, and now she's petrified to go off, even though she's done okay. And whenever I'm watching her or walking with her, she's taking her shoes off. The neuropathy is just so bad, and it's really hindering her life. And so there's just things that come along, and you're like, if I don't have to do this,
Yeah,
I don't want to do it.
yeah. One of the things you've done so well in the book, I mean, everything in this book is amazing, but one of the things you've done so well is each chapter you end up with some kind of an interview
Yeah.
with a person who is really an expert, and you've had amazing thought leaders in the field. You actually comment on an author I like, Brene Brown, in one of the
Yes.
chapters, and she talks about shame and guilt and relationships, and Brene is really excellent. She just does that so well. And you have an amazing relationship with Paul, your husband, and it just shows in the book. But I mean, cancer diagnosis twice puts so much strain on these relationships. It's really
Hmm.
becomes difficult. And how do what advice do you give people so they can just stay grounded? Because it's like an earthquake that will shake the
Hmm.
household when this happens, frankly. And it's not really trivial, but yet you both weathered the storms. And it's like, you could tell Paul he's probably, the hero for everyone because he was very supportive. Having said that, that doesn't really happen always. As a physician, I've seen it go sour sometimes, and
Yeah.
I've seen
Yeah.
relationships go strong. Are there specific things that you advise people as they go through this that allow them to maintain that relationship and that bond strong?
Yeah, I think the most important part, because you captured something really important. I wrote this book for the caregiver as much as I wrote it for the patient. And I did that because having read the 30 journals, I realized that the toll this took, at the end, you hear me apologize to my sister, my daughter, and my husband, all because the journey took such a tremendous toll on them. And that looking back on it, I don't think that I appreciated everything they were giving up for me. So the advice I give at the end of the book, which I think is so important, is for patients to understand, reach out to people for help and don't hesitate to do that. But if there are things you can still be doing on your own, do it. Like I would, if somebody was offering me a ride, especially Paul, to drive to Dana-Farber or Mount Sinai where I was getting treatment, I would always take him up on it. Hey, I'd rather be the passenger than the driver. But there were a million times I didn't need him to do that. But if you offer me, I'm going to take it up on and do it, right? All those things took him away from work. And so, and yet I found like on the breast cancer side, I just kept driving myself and doing, the more you do things on your own, when you can, you feel good about it. Like, oh, I can still do that. I'm fine doing
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
And so I think there's an element of holding on to a bit of your independence. At the same time, having a larger support group than just your partner or your daughter or child. Reach out to your
Your eight
the eight.
people.
The eight were phenomenal. And they're still phenomenal. Like there's anything we ever need from each other, it's a text and you've got it done. So you have to have, not everybody is eight. You can have one good friend, but spread the needs around. And then my best advice for the caregiver is speak up. Don't wait. I mean, I think there were so many points where resentment was building. I think Paul was getting frustrated and probably resented having sacrificed so much in his life. I think my sister and Nicole probably felt the same way. And that's why I did the apology. At the same time, I didn't know how frustrated they were because they
Yeah.
didn't say it. They didn't come out and say it. They were trying to protect me, but I would have been much better off if somebody had looked at me in the eye and just said, you know what, this has been too much. We need to find other ways to get help for you.
It's difficult to say. I actually have an entire chapter called "Caring for the Caregiver," as you would read. One of the things that happened with serendipity in your life, Kathy, is that you actually became a caregiver, essentially, to your sister,
Mm-hmm.
who gave you the bone marrow. And it's really this dynamic is unbelievable. And in page 195, you write something I really liked. It says, there's a difference between caregiving and sacrificing. You must do things that bring you joy when you're a caregiver, or you'll burn out and resent the situation you're in. So you became a caregiver to your
Mm-hmm.
sister who was diagnosed with cancer. How did you balance that? I mean, you're a patient and a caregiver. I mean, that's, to me, it sounds like a very tough situation because you want to give, but you also have your own thing to deal with.
Yeah, and it was interesting because at the same time, my mom had melanoma. And I didn't write this in the book because it was just getting to be too many cancer people in our family. But my mom had melanoma and I had gotten her to UPenn. So we had three of us with three different cancers at three different centers, and we're all working, my sister and I are both working full time. I think at that point, that's where I learned that you have to be there for the person, especially when they really need you. And so you have to figure out when they really need you. Like for my mom, she needed somebody to drive her to UPenn. She needed somebody to get her in for all of her surgeries. For my sister, it was the same thing, like know exactly when they needed me. Where I felt it was important was the job of the patient to consistently communicate where they need somebody to help them and when it's going to be. So that like the biggest priority moments for me, it was my stem cell transplant. It was also, as you could tell, like for my breast cancer surgery, which ended up getting moved. So everybody's on the ready, and then I get COVID and it gets moved. But you've got to like constantly be in communication with your team to say, this is when I need you, and please be available. And then have backups if you can. Then I think once you've got that, then I think there are the moments to just try to make the most of it. I mean, my sister and I have had many a laugh when we're sitting in cancer rooms just doing stupid stuff together. And I think you have to try to keep it light when you're together and move through it and have find some joy in the moment. And then when you're through, like as we wrote in the book, of course I knew when she was finishing, I knew how hard it was going to be. And even though she didn't need me there that day, you show up because you want to celebrate with them. And I think those moments are really important. But I think the biggest takeaway from the book was the focus that I had, and we probably read it between the lines, was just the traditions. Like you just want to do everything you can for your family and making sure you hold on to those traditions because people are going to get sick, people are going to lose their health, and you want to make sure that everybody's staying safe. And those traditions bring you back to kind of a ground zero.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. The right now, you're not doing day-to-day operations with the MMRF, but you're on the board. Kathy, sometimes I hear a lot of folks who um, caution foundations like the MMRF, the IMF, breast cancer, all of these foundations, that there's a lot of quote unquote pharmaceutical influence into
Mm,
the direction of these foundations. And they worry that this influence might actually not always be in the best interest of patients.
yeah.
How do you respond to that? How do you maintain the relationships with pharma, obviously, because they're bringing the new drugs, let's face it. And you mentioned in your book about Revlimid, Velcade, and
Mhm.
daratumumab and others. How do you maintain that while also trying to make sure that the influence on patients is not really substantial that might go have like an adverse way?
Yeah, I think this gets back into different incentives. You know, what drives everybody in the healthcare industry and how do you bring everybody together in the right way? And when you're running a foundation, the most important thing you can do is have a very clear mission and understand which groups are going to help you achieve that mission. So in many situations, it's the academic centers, it's bringing in the community because they're going to find the right patients to do clinical trials with you, and 70% of care is in the community. It's the NCI in terms of what grants they're funding in basic science, so you don't have to fund those. And then you're moving out and you're saying, okay, well, you need pharma and biotech because they have the best drugs and you want to be working side by side with them. So at the end of the day, what we did at the MMRF, and we really tried to make sure our raising of dollars was never dependent on one group. So we always went to major donors. And then, we would always do a multitude of events to have money coming in. And then you don't rely on your pharma grants because if push comes to shove and that drug's not going to work out and things have to fall apart, you don't want to be dependent on that. So I always say to people, the best way to see what a foundation is doing is to look at their 990. That's always held, their financials are always on the About Us part of the foundation. And then you can also look at Charity Navigator and other groups to see, how the foundation is raising money. In our situation, we were always trying to make sure that if we were doing major donors and events, each of those would be a third of the money. So you've got 2/3 there, and then perhaps another third coming in from pharma. So you want to see what those ratios look like. If a foundation is sitting there and they've got 65% of their money coming in from pharma, that's not a good thing. Like you don't want to have that. You want to make sure you've got a blend of money
Yeah,
coming in.
great advice. Um, and Kathy, I mean, I have a lot of goosebumps throughout the book, but there was a moment where I teared a lot. I'm
Mm.
not gonna lie. When you described your mother's funeral,
Oh.
I um, I mean, you described it as very beautiful,
Mhm.
but I could imagine how difficult it was. There's no way. I mean, she could be 102, 300 years, 92. There's only one mother, right?
Yeah.
There's only one mother. It doesn't matter how old it is, but you described it and you described how it happened. And she was, she was a nurse. She was the person you always called, one of the first WTFs when she told your grandfather had myeloma. So obviously, I know this is very emotional to think through, but you wanted to share this to bring a lot of a human element, I presume. Like, what you wanted to share this with readers to tell them that, you know, we lose people, we win. Like, tell me what got you to, like when you decide to write the book, you can't write about everything. How did you decide the things that you want to share with the world versus things, maybe I'll keep this to myself? How, talk through the process of writing the book and how
Yeah,
did
I
you,
felt like everybody wanted me to write a what to do book, right? So working with HarperCollins, it was supposed to be a what to do book, and it was going to be very dry, and
yeah,
this is what you should do, right? And I kept thinking to myself, I don't really want to write a book like that. Like I feel like people will relate more to characters in the book
of
than
course.
they will to the steps. And if I can make it all come alive, that would work best. So I wanted the book to be able to go to, if you're a cancer patient and your mom is still alive, I want her to be able to read the book and understand the role of a mom. I want a daughter to read the book and understand, like at the time my daughter was in first grade, she's getting married next month. She's 30,
Congratulations.
yeah, and David's engaged too. So like so you kind of move through these children and you move, and it's kind of why I wrote about the breast cancer. Like what they're dealing with at different ages matters. Their ages matter when you're dealing with cancer. So I was trying to give that perspective. I was trying to give space and grace to the partner, like husband or wife, whoever's taking care of you. I wanted everybody to, sisters, I wanted everybody to read it and say, I get it. Like, I understand they may not relate to me. They might relate to my sister, or they might relate to Paul. In the situation with my mom, it was, I was trying to really give people a sense of end of life without going into it. My life hasn't ended yet. Hers ended gracefully. But I also was trying to give a shot over the bow that you've got to talk about it. Like I knew exactly what my mom wanted at end of life. I was her medical proxy. I knew what would be the time to move her to hospice care. I knew what she was looking for her funeral. We had talked about every single thing. So it was still heartbreaking to lose her, but I felt like the end of life discussion had been had. I can't believe how many people don't have it. And so that was a nod to
Yeah.
remember to do this. Like it's really important.
Yes, and it's the segment in the book that really made me tear because I could, it's very difficult. It's very
Yeah,
difficult. And you know, in one of the things that you write here, you know, we can all ask ourselves what we would do if we were told we were going to die, but it's impossible to answer until you experience it firsthand. And it is
right.
impossible unless you
It
really
is.
get told this, it's impossible. So I look, you taught me a lot. I love the book, Fatal to Fearless, 12 Steps to Beating Cancer in a Broken Medical System. And I agree with you. If you would just like a list of to-do things, I probably, it will be very dry. So you bring the human element, scientific element, practical element. Not a lot of people could do this. You do it so beautifully. Is there a second
Thank
book
you.
coming up from Kathy Giusti?
I don't know. I have to wait and see how how I recover from this one.
Hey, you
But
have
it
about
was
like, you know, 5 minutes a day that you're not doing anything. We could,
not
you
doing
know,
anything. Yeah.
yeah,
I think, I'm a little bit like you because I know, you having been an author and being an author too, the importance is not just writing it, but making sure people know that it's out there. And so a lot of the time you spend, which you think would be so easy, like, but you've just spent your life writing something that every patient needs.
yeah,
And, same thing for you. You're writing something that you know is important. You're putting your heart and soul into it. It's still hard to let every patient know it's out there. And so I think that's
absolutely.
my job now. And also for the clinicians too. And yours is going to do the same thing. You want docs and patients to know there are resources available to them to help them finally. Because I certainly didn't have that.
Yeah. Well, I could tell you I love the book, and I no doubt a lot of people are reading it and will read it. And I think we should do everything possible to let people know about it. There's so many valuable lessons, practical lessons. It's just beautiful blend between the human element of what you went through as a patient, and then what you've done with it as an executive who really was instrumental in bringing new drugs to market, and then the practicality aspect. Look, let me just tell you what you need to do, X, Y, and Z, and it's just amazing. Congratulations, Kathy. This is
Thank
really
you.
one of the best books I've read really in a long time, and I don't say that lightly.
I appreciate that, especially coming from you.
No, thank you, and we're gonna have you back on the podcast, Kathy Giusti, the
I'd love
author
that.
of Fatal to fearless. Thank you so much for coming on
Thank
Healthcare
you.
Unfiltered.